Hello, I'm Abby Hart, Senior Editor of Landscape Management Magazine. Today I'm joined by CEO of Landscape Development Incorporated, Gary Horton. LDI is based in Valencia, California, and was number 19 on our LM 150 this year. Gary, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
Good. The last time we spoke, we were in the early days of the pandemic, and you said things were going well and you were cleared to work in California. How have things been since March?
The start of the pandemic had an awful lot of unknowns. At first, we weren't deemed essential. A couple weeks went by where it was unclear. And we had offices, for example, in Las Vegas that were closed, for certain operations in San Francisco that were stopped. Fairly quickly on, we were deemed essential, or at least it was clarified as such, and both maintenance and construction operations have been continuous ever since. And we were also granted permission to fire back up in Las Vegas. So on the surface, we've been continuing all of our operations as normal in the field. In the office, of course, that's taken an entirely different course where we've had to first work at home, and now as offices have been partially reopened, do the whole social distancing thing. So office work is dramatically different than it used to be. We've done well with that because last year we invested in building a very robust company intranet site that included Microsoft Teams, similar to Zoom, and all the other tools and processes that we normally would use inside our office were built into the intranet site. So when we were forced to work from home and distant, the site helped bring us close very quickly. We fired up rapidly. Nowadays, we have about 25–30% of our staff back in offices, the rest are at home, and we continue on in the field, working with all the PPE and all the different processes that we use to keep our work team safe.
It sounds like you put a lot of measures in place, Gary. So what I wanted to ask you about is that we're seeing all of these reports of the devastating wildfires out on the West Coast. Given that LDI is a huge company with offices all over California, I wanted to know how has your company been affected by the wildfires?
Of course, we're Californians, and we're really saddened by the damage that's been done to the nature in the state. The smoke has been overwhelming up and down the state, particularly in the inland valleys, but it's so bad now, it's even on the coast. Many days have unhealthy air, and some days have had hazardous air. So we've been forced to curtail working days or even working hours in certain areas on certain days. So mixed with the fires, we've also had very hot temperatures in certain locations, 110, even 115, and our crews are already working with masks on. And if you can imagine the misery of being a field worker with a mask on a hot day with smoky air, it's just more and more piled up to make it difficult for a field worker to be productive and efficient. So we've had to take that into account in scheduling, and definitely had to take it into account for safety and the well-being of our crews, which does in fact come first. And on top of all this is mitigating COVID and keeping the crews safe, and also dealing with now, what are we, 6–7 months in, the psychological and emotional effects of families having to cope with this and workers having to cope with this. For example, now that school season is back in, many workers have, both parents work, two-worker families, and yet they're supposed to educate their kids at home, right? And so where do they find time for this? And how do they make that work? So as a company, we've been dealing with that issue too. How can we best assist our workers so that they have sufficient flexibility, both from the office and in the field, to deal appropriately and properly with their own children, and all the other weight and burden that is now accumulating from COVID. It's not a small task. It's very wide of breadth.
Absolutely. What are some of the things that you were, offering as far as flexibility? Are you cutting back on hours where you can, or what are the approaches that you're taking?
So first of all, as much as possible, we want to be very flexible in hours and very understanding during this unique time. It's easier for office workers for us to have complete flexibility. Field staff, there we have to be flexible and gracious in allowing days off, different time shifts, and above all, we want our crews to be open and communicative about what they need and how we can best put together schedules or work programs to help them get through and succeed in their own lives till we get to the other side of this. It's complex, and I think above all, companies have to be thoughtful, gracious, and flexible. And now's not the time to be rigid hardliners, not at all. It's easy to put ourselves in other people's positions in this and really understand the difficulties that families are going through.
Gary, you mentioned that you actually took another measure to sort of offset the impact of some of your employees from this coronavirus. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. One of the things we've done, it started just this last month, is we paid all field staff 1 extra day for the month, and all office staff have received 1 extra paid day off. And while this isn't a huge amount, it certainly helps. Every bit helps because we understand that there's a certain amount of emotional stress, and so time off is helpful, and there's a certain amount of financial stress, and any extra money helps. So we did this past month, and we're going to try to do it at the end of September, and then October, November, and December. It's a little bit, but it messages that we actually do care. It does add up to be something substantial, and for our particular business, that rolls up to be about $1 million, which is a lot of money. I suppose if we were a public company, we wouldn't be able to have that latitude, but we're not. We're a private company, and we really do care about the folks that work for us. And I'm thinking that that level of goodwill will not only be tangible help in the real time right now, but also, I think, in the months or years to come, our people will remember that when times were tough, we were, in fact, thoughtful and gracious, and worked hard to help us all get through to the other side. So that's one example of really living through with your objectives, with your employees, really living it as a business.
Wow, that's really generous, and I'm sure that your employees really appreciate that offering. Gary, first we had COVID, as you mentioned, and now we have these wildfires on the West Coast. And given that we're talking about California here, there's also things to consider like earthquakes and issues and disasters like that. How are you trying to lead through these crises?
The first thing is communication, all the way down. We put out messaging through all levels of the company at least weekly, and keep people abreast of how the company is doing in sales, financially, and in our COVID response. We do special COVID meetings once a week and track together through the whole organization what's happening as far as new cases, isolation, our response to it. To date, we've had 0 cases originate at work. We've had 24 people out of over 1,000 actually come down with COVID, and every one of them were traced back to family life.
Wow.
In our company, when we have one person get ill, we quarantine the entire crew and anybody they've been with at the company immediately. We doubled paid time off to cover the entire quarantine period. So when a worker is quarantined, it doesn't hurt them financially. You probably notice a common theme here, and that is that we're working very hard to isolate the staff, field and office, from the financial ramifications of COVID. So first is communication, and I think then is the understanding and the flexibility and working with families to succeed. For everything people might hear about California, employment's very tight, and it's really hard to get good people. So it's essential that we work to keep our staff that we've worked for years to develop. And that means that we as a company approach this whole COVID thing and the economic fallout of it really as a group, as a team. And it sounds trite, but working for one another's success.
That's great. Do you have any advice for other landscape companies that are going through the similar things that you are going through?
Obviously, each company is different, and the size of the company dictates the resources that they have to throw at this COVID thing, right? We happen to have a really robust HR staff with tremendously experienced HR people that have made this much easier than it could have been. From the start, our COVID response was quick. For example, now when you walk into our offices, we have the forehead thing. You walk up to the machine and it does your temperature. There's signage, custom-made signage everywhere. All the restrooms have the doodads and the chemicals, and there's masks everywhere, and ditto on the trucks. All the trucks have the thermometers and all the goop, and they're disinfected once or twice a day, and all the PPE stuff, and we front loaded that, and we've kept it up to date, and we keep messaging it. We've had the resources to do that and to do it vigorously from the start. Smaller companies, I think, need to look at this and make sure that the bases are covered within reason to do everything they can by the guidelines of the CDC or any state guidelines that they have. And then beyond that, really work with their staff in a compassionate way. Try to see it their way. To be frank, in our industry, it's not known to be the highest paying industry in the field staff, right? Our group of employees they're reported to be more susceptible to getting this disease. That's a fact. And to be hurt financially from the implications of it. And my personal belief is that it's incumbent on us as business owners to do what we can to make sure that our people aren't hurt by this. That would be my advice, is to be very thoughtful about it and considerate about it.
Wow, absolutely. That's really insightful, and thank you for that, Gary. Thank you for spending time with us today. Please stay safe out there in California. All our best to you. Everyone, that was Gary Horton, CEO of Landscape Development, Inc. in Valencia, California. I'm Abby Hart, Senior Editor of Landscape Management Magazine. Thank you for watching.